We're here for the dissertation defense of J.R. Dunlap, or Nathaniel Dunlap, more properly. And present in the room are Dr. Emmanuel Larte, who was his primary advisor, Dr. Marcia Riggs, who was the program's lead teacher. We also have as guests Spencer Murray, who's another student in the program, Dr. Kathy Dawson, who's a faculty member at Columbia Seminary, and Kathy Dunlap, JR's wife. JR, it's all yours.
Well, good afternoon and welcome to this special edition of the PRF Table. I'm your host, Brother Nathaniel Dunlap Jr., and I'm just here to talk to you a little bit about what has been going on with PRF over the last couple of years. Today's episode is called Possessions, Resources, and Finances. PRF, helping communities understand the relationship between financial, spiritual, and physical needs. Now, just a little bit about myself. We know a lot of people have not been with us, but for the 20,000+ members who have been with us over the last 2.5 years, you may know a little bit about this information already. But for myself as an educator and as a host of a radio ministry about financial management and stewardship, I converse with people on diverse topics of religious backgrounds and on economic and spiritual topics. And what I found is that teaching ministries and churches often inadequately focus on the relationship between the financial, spiritual, and physical needs. So I proposed a transformative teaching model entitled Possessions, Resources, and Finances that religious leaders could holistically educate individuals and communities about these concerns. Now, for me, this is a personal matter. It goes beyond the fact that I have 2 children in college right now, and student loans debt when children come out of college is over $25,000 on average. It goes beyond the fact of unemployment rates being as high as they still are, people filing for bankruptcies, the financial challenges that people have in regards to marriages, especially divorce, or what the poverty level is. To me, it goes even beyond the fact of people dying in this country without wills. What I'm seeing is the lack of concern by religious leaders and the fact of inadequately addressing these particular matters, knowing that there are hurting people in these churches and that the issues are currently there. So for those who are new to the PRF table, PRF is this. It is a financial-based teaching model that religious educators and local communities can use to come together on financial-related matters. Since the religious leaders in the financial community is really my target, I really went to that route because I wanted them to get together before they actually go and engage the local community. We're really rooting this whole process on spiritual and practical application. As a minister, I can pronounce the word to you, I can speak from a spiritual perspective, but we have to have practical application in order to make it relevant in people's lives. The platform that we're using is called Conflict Transformation. And let me tell you how I was inspired by conflict transformation. John Paul Lederach, who I consider to be the father of conflict transformation, says this. He says, quick solutions to deep social political problems usually mean lots of good words but no real change. So that's what I have been seeing over the years. He also said that you have to have 3 lenses in order to have a conceptual framework. So for conflict transformation, you have to have a lens that sees the short term. You have to see a lens that has the long term in mind. But it's like this. You have a person who is hungry, give them a fish. But if they need something to eat, you really want to teach them how to fish. So the third lens of conflict transformation is putting those together, looking deep into the interpersonal relationships by looking at the context, looking at the content, and looking at the structure of the relationships and of the political societies. So I propose this definition. Conflict transformation is an intentional, life-producing process that invites humanity to seek and create safe environments by identifying, naming, and understanding the root causes of conflict, and then creating together practical and agreed upon courses of action for sustainable or increased health of a community. Now, this definition seems long because it is, but it's not a static definition, it's definitely fluid. So as I talk about this journey over the last couple of years, several parts of this definition will pop out at you. how did I approach this? I approached this with two research questions in particular. The first one is a biblical theological question. Can the biblical text foundational to PRF, Acts chapter 2, 42 and 47, and 2 Kings chapter 4, verses 1 through 7, transform the understanding of possessions, resources, and finances inside of the church? The second one is one of education. How might a financial-based transformative model be beneficial to bridging the gap between the social as well as the spiritual needs being met by the people? And so the journey started for me really with conducting surveys. So I developed and I administered surveys. That was phase one. Phase two was actually workshops that I had not planned on doing at the beginning of this journey. Now, we're broadcasting with you live from the campus of Columbia Theological Seminary in Decatur, Georgia, but the setting where all this occurred was actually in Phoenix City, Alabama. So what I did was I reached out to religious leaders and churches within a 200-mile radius of where I'm actually physically located at. And also when I did the workshops, I narrowed it down a little bit. I brought it a little bit closer to home. My county of Lee County, Alabama, as well as Russell County and the county of Barber County in the state of Alabama. So phase one, I had 3 surveys. One for the religious leaders, one for the religious community, the members in the congregation, if you will, and one for the local community. And when I administered them, everybody had the same information, basically, the same selling points, if you will. So section A on the survey was dealing with needs. I was focusing on what was the needs. Are they being addressed? Are they being neglected? Are they being under-addressed? Section B, which is really, really critical, was focused on resource availability. I was looking at what is the resources that's being made available to me as a member of the church, and as a religious leader, what am I doing to provide those resources to the members of that community? And the third section was dealing with effectiveness and practicality. So there I was focusing on what are the perceptions of the people, the leaders and the members. I'm focusing on what was the theories that they had in their mind of why they were doing the things that they were doing when it comes to helping with financially related matters. But I also realized that this was an unspoken error because the type of questions that were being asked probably would have pushed the envelope a little bit and had the members to actually give honesty of their leadership and of their organizations. So dealing with this second section, section B, I did it from 3 different vantage points. The first one was from an internal standpoint. What is the church doing for me? And as a religious leader, what am I doing for the members of the church? From an internal, external perspective, what is my state, my regional, my national religious organization doing? So if you're a part of a connectional church, or you're part of a denomination that has some non-governing bodies, if you will, what are they doing to provide resources back down to the members inside of the community when they need it? And then from an external, internal point of view, what type of religious organizations are actually helping out you in your particular context? So what is your church doing to help my church? So how I went about this was doing an analysis. So I went to the 22 religious leaders that I was fortunate enough to have participated in this process. And I can't bring up everything that was on the model, but what I did was I looked at effectiveness and practicality as a key point. And 68% of the leaders said that the resources that were being provided were somewhat effective. 73% of them said that they were 73% that actually were practical. The thing about it was not all religious leaders responded to that question, so that was something that I had in the back of my mind as I went forward. And then I went and looked at what was the members saying. So I had 103 members over various churches, 6 different churches in the community, and they were saying that it was 42% effective and 51% practical. The thing that was the conflict for me was they were saying that the resources being offered was a whole lot less effective and less practical. But now, I couldn't do apples to oranges, so I had to do apples to apples. And so what I did at that point was I did a leader congregational analysis. And I used 3 churches in particular. Let's call them Charlie Community Church, Bravo Baptist, and Faith Christian. And I focused on what I'm calling 7 common ground themes. So what I did was I took questions that were relatable on both surveys, the religious leaders and on the members, and I said, what are some commonalities or what are some differences that I can find and that I can deal with? For me, I was looking at those being starter conversations because my intent was to take this information back to the particular congregations and be able to engage them in conversation to work towards this model of conflict transformation. Well, that didn't work too well because of conflicts with scheduling, because of things dealing with the leaders that were participating and transferred to other churches. So what I had to do was, I said, according to Bill Hogan, he wrote a book called How Do You Eat an Elephant? Well, the answer is one bite at a time. And I realized that because the religious leaders were aware of the questions I was asking of their members in their congregation, that they may not want to tackle it because it was so big. And so, for example, Common Ground question number 5 deals with what resources are made available. And I was able to find out from this particular congregation that 33% of the members, as well as 4 out of 5 of the religious leaders, said religious books and scriptures, this is what we're using to help. Well, that was the way it was with everybody in every single church. But 33% of the members did not have any idea what type of resources were being offered. And they also had religious, in addition to religious books and literatures, they also had non-religious books as a choice that they could have chosen from, financial literature, social media, educational, but this was the one. And it was interesting that 12% of the people, only 12% of the people actually knew who to contact when they were looking for help. So for me, it gave an opportunity for transformation. When I went back and thought about my research question, the first one, I realized that I had not really made through these surveys any real inquiries. So I didn't make any real inquiry to my particular text of Acts chapter 2 and 2 Kings chapter 4. And just by the surveys alone, I had no idea what specific text they were saying were effective and that they were saying was practical or not. So from an educational point of view, I was a little discouraged because it revealed that there was a low priority on financial education in the church. Only between 5 to 8% was financial literacy, one of the resources that these churches were saying was actually being used. So for me, that became an opportunity for new teaching practices. Again, if I had the opportunity to go back to the church, then this is some of the things that I would actually bring back to them. Now, phase two was the pilot workshops. I had an opportunity to preach at a church on August 31st, and I visited the church, and after visiting the church, the pastor told me that he had about four members that had passed away within a 3-month period in his congregation. And so prior to coming back and preaching, the Lord spoke to me and said, offer them the opportunity while they're going through this grieving process to produce this workshop for them. And so I was given this opportunity, and that was the start of the first of 3 workshops called Will You or Will You Not? And so this is where I'm starting to develop the tools for PRF, the dialogical tools. How can we communicate? So the first tool I have is what's called the growth objective. In traditional education, there's something that's being used called the banking method. That is, I am the professor, I am the teacher, and what I'm giving you, you need to learn. What I was looking at focusing on more inductive work, trying to find out what's the real life experiences that the people are having. How can they bring those to the table? And so here's the thing that I did. It's a very simple question. What do you want to get from this workshop? And so I took that information and was able to analyze their responses later on from workshop to workshop. There's another form that I have. It's called a Financial Ministry Needs Assessment, or FMNA. And this is to gather information or to gather statistics and data. It produces follow-up questions. And in one of the workshops, one of the questions from looking at the information, only 50% of those individuals participating actually had a will. So that was one of the questions. Are there any internal barriers within an individual that is preventing them from having a will, such as fear, trust, shame, things of that nature? Or how do you handle the express need to prepare a will? Because some of them said they know they need a will, but how do you handle that in the church when they're saying that this is something that's needed? The other thing with this form is it produces current statistics, because there hasn't been any current statistics on how many people actually have a will in this country since 2012. So as I was going through these workshops, one of the things that I was doing was constantly adding upon the data that I was collecting from each one of the workshops. And by the time I finished, 39% of those individuals actually said that they have wills, which is lower than what the national average was of 44%. But 100% of them felt that they should actually have a will. So the good part of it is now they have something that they can go forward with. So my question to you, those of you who are listening, is what are the stats in your household? What are the stats in your church? What are those statistics in your family and also in your community? The next tool I had is what's called a table exercise. This was the most interactive tool that I actually had. I put people in groups of 2 to 5, people that most of the time did not know each other if it was from the same congregation or maybe not having a lot of conversation with each other. And this tool was designed to make sure that people could respond to a certain question and not have to say that it's them. So for me, it was about starting a dialogue of breaking barriers and giving them the opportunity to share openly. And so here's how it worked. I asked them, tell me some reasons why people don't prepare, don't keep up to date, or don't even prepare wills in the first place. And so they didn't have to say, this is why I'm not doing it. All they had to do was respond and provide the answer. And what I found was, at least when I started the process, that there was two things. I had 2 I's and 2 S's. 2 spirits of fear, two spirits, spirit of fear and a spirit of procrastination, or insufficient knowledge, or insufficient preparation/organization. And I found that most of the responses fit inside of one of those 4 categories. Knowledge was the one category that most of the responses out of all the workshops actually engaged in. They were asking questions or giving responses, I don't know what the process is, or it costs too much money, or I don't need to have a will because I actually have insurance. This is where I'm really getting to the root cause analysis. This is where I'm able to find out what's really going on, and this is the opportunity to be able to have the opportunity to be able to be pastoral to these individuals by uncovering these particular things. And lo and behold, this is what I found. There was not just 2 I's and 2 S's. There was other things that were birthed from this. The spirit of pride started coming up within the workshops. Insufficient resources started coming up in the workshops. And the most critical thing, I believe, was their emotions, because these are the things that you cannot see on the inside. Shame was one, guilt was the other, and trust. Can we bring this information to our particular congregation? And most of the time, the answer was no. So it brought me back to my final research question, which was, how might the principles derived from the implementation of this PRF educational model contribute over time to the overall health of individual members of congregations and communities? Religious involvement and religious invitation is key. There has to be an invitation by the religious leaders in order for us to be able to do this work that God has put upon me. And then praying continuously for the individuals as well as for the facilitators of PRF, because we never know from workshop to workshop, from session to session, what individuals are actually experiencing during this process. And most critical for me was the scriptures, Acts chapter 2 and 2 Kings chapter 4. So what I found out even recently, that I had to really connect possessions, resources, and finances and pull out of those scriptures how they can actually see how these scriptures actually matter. So for example, with possessions, when they sold their property and possessions, and helping them to see what their possessions are, what is their property, because a lot of people don't realize what they actually have. Same thing with resources. In 2 Kings chapter 4, when Elijah told the woman, the widow woman, what do you have, when she cried out for help? She said, nothing except for these jars of oil. And then he said, go borrow as many jars as you can from your neighbors and your friends. She never realized that the neighbors and the friends were actually resources, as well as those pots that they actually were supposed to be actually obtaining from. And then actually from finances. When chapter 2 of Acts, when they sold their possessions and they sold their property, they were able to bring the money and provide those to the people in need. So this is where I'm actually using, not just as the foundational text, but even in my PRF overview. Now, what I was embarking on was a community-based resource, participatory action resource project. And what I found was, it was a cycle, a never-ending cycle, if you will, of planning, some actions, some observations, and then some reflections. So at every phase of this, even at with the workshops and the surveys, I was constantly going in this revolving circle. All of my planning had to be intentional. Even when the workshops were not intentional from the beginning, when I realized that this was going to be a part of the project, I had to be intentional about that. The action was not just of what I was doing, but it was also all the people that were participating in this whole project. And I can tell you that my observations, observing all of the data, observing the individuals as I'm physically and personally engaging with them, was labor intensive. And I had to be aware of what my surroundings was, the different congregations, the different denominations, and what the ministers was actually going through as well. When I did a lot of my reflection, I had to figure out what did I want to keep and what did I want to discard. So for example, I mentioned that I had surveys done with the local community. Well, I had to discard those because I realized I didn't have enough data with the religious communities to be able to compare those apples to apples. So now I had to eventually get to a point where I said, let me just put something together as far as this model. And here's where I was able to be comforted by. There's no perfect model out there. I realized that during this process, I'm going to constantly be evolving with this model, and the model will be evolving itself because I'm actually dealing with people. And so imagine it like this. Imagine a triangle, and you have at each point, one is possessions, one is resources, and one is finances. And what is happening is all of our PRF is constantly flowing in between these, and they're constantly affecting each other. But we're always going to have disruptions in this model. We're always going to have a disruption somewhere. It may not be a great disruption, but we will have one. So the question then becomes, how are you going to deal with it? How are you going to deal with this loss of a job? How are you going to deal when something breaks in the house and something, and money is not there to actually fix it? But more especially, how do you actually embrace the process of going through a conflict transformation model during this process? And so I came up with a total of 5 tools at the end. One is definitely the scriptures, as I mentioned to you before. Every scripture has more than just Acts chapter 2 and 2 Kings. There are relative scriptures, not just one-liners, but relative scriptures that have narratives to them that I've been able to apply. And there's a growth objective, because what I wanted to find is that you can seek out what is important to you, and you'll be more engaged if you do it. The FM&As to determine what their needs and concerns are, having that information up front. Jane Bella said that if you can gather that information up front and know more about your audience, from the onset, you have a better opportunity to be able to engage them in what they're trying to learn. And I actually created a pre-FM&A because some people may not want to jump directly into having an actual learning session. So this was a way to ease into this sometimes difficult and challenging type of work. And the table exercises opened up dialogue and opened up and created space for people to be honest. And then the last piece was case stories. We all have stories. Our narratives are important, so we have to allow people the opportunity to tell their stories, because if you can tell their stories and help them to relate what's going on to their stories, then you can sometimes find root causes within those themselves. So the lessons for PRF, lesson 1 is God's ownership. Lesson 2 is stewardship and practical principle. Lesson 3, credit and debt are first cousins. Lesson 4, will you or will you not? And those lessons are available now, so we're already starting to offer those and starting to teach those right now. Later on, we'll have lesson 5, which is giving God's way. Lesson 6, tithing out of law or out of love. And lesson 7, planning and savings are our next door neighbors. So here's how I want you to leave with what PRF is with conflict transformation. It's like your home alarm going off, and you happen to come home. There's a couple things that you can do. 1, you can cut the wires. 2, you can use the right code. And the third thing is you can call for help. So in conflict transformation dealing with PRF, cutting the wires may mean you have to cut off certain mindsets. You may have to cut some individuals off from doing some things around you. But using the right code, using the Word of God, definitely. But also using spiritual as well as practical application. And sometimes it's going to come from using resources that are not biblical. And the third thing, which is what I'm just trying to do, I'm just trying to answer the call for help. 1, call for God, but 2, we have to call on each other. Somebody asked me this question: what has been going on with you, Brother Dunlap? Well, I can tell you that I have been stretched far and wide throughout this process. As a religious educator, I have been pushing boundaries. I've been pushing boundaries with myself as also with the religious leaders. And I've come to this conclusion. It is not about what I'm teaching, it's about what I'm learning. I realize that as an educator, I'm learning from my students. I'm learning for the participants. And as an administrator, I've had to do a lot of prioritizing in my life with my family as well as the ministry. Standards. My standards have increased because I realized that but let me go back. When it comes to being an administrator, I realize this. It is definitely about trying to help people to stay out the ditch, but I also have understood that it's about keeping some individuals from actually getting into the driver's seat that don't have a license to actually drive. And so being pastoral, it's not just me as a pastor being pastoral, it's what we do as community to be pastoral. And so I was able to see the pastoral relationship being played out inside of the workshops. I had a great appreciation for those who have the title of pastor and realized the balancing act that has to come with being a pastor. And that's why I understood how some of the pastors were not more receptive, and maybe it wasn't receptive, but they had other things that they were working on and focusing. And so one of my site team members helped me realize this. As a religious educator, as an administrator, as a pastor, it's about what I am giving as well as what I'm receiving. So I have to be able to put this into a way that is a quid pro quo, letting them be able to see the importance and the value of it, but also realizing that this is not their number one priority. This is a priority that God has given me. So I can tell you that I am definitely still a work in progress, although I'm coming to the end of this journey, and I'm sure that I will continue to evolve in these ministerial competencies. So here's the final thought. It is vital for participants to know and understand that God has given each one of us certain PRF, that can be used to sustain and increase the economic health of our churches and local communities. PRF, in partnership with churches and communities, offer this opportunity. I thank you for your time. I thank everybody who has been here live and those who are also at New York Theological Seminary and those who have just joined us for the first time. Join us on each Thursday night on the PRF table, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, as we come together and have more of these lively discussions. God bless you. Have a good day.